Hey folks, this is Kelani. As we get closer and closer to Battle for Azeroth releasing, we're running out of time for any sort of preparation here. I hope you've all bought your Goblin Glider kits because they're going to start soaring in price pretty soon. A few potions, a few flasks, and maybe a stack or two of food can't hurt either. But that also means we're running out of time to get some preparation videos up, including our set of ranking videos. We've tackled the tanks, we've wrangled the ranged, and we even marshaled the melee. All that's left is to have a look at how the healers are shaping up and see who will rise and who might fall. So let's get to it. Here's my ranking of the healers in Battle for Azeroth. Each healer has quite different playstyles, flow and mechanics of how their abilities work. They also come with their own strengths and weaknesses, so we're going to look at most of these factors when making a decision on where a healer belongs in the ranking. But dungeons and raids are going to be significantly different from a healer's perspective. You're on your own in dungeons. People will live or die based on how well you play and the decisions you make, whereas in raids you have a little group of healers to help you out. That means you can each be assigned to different healing jobs which match up with your own strengths, and you're probably going to be feeling your weaknesses a lot more in dungeons when compared to raids, but you really have a chance to shine in dungeons when there's no one else to snipe your heals. So we'll take dungeons vs raids into consideration as well. Let's kick things off with the masters of heal over time effects, the Druids. If you've played a Druid healer before, you should roughly know what you're getting yourself into. Pretty much every single spell has a heal over time component, which makes Druids the masters of dealing with small amounts of constant group-wide or raid-wide damage. No one else has to bat an eye. The rejuves and wild growths should keep everyone happy, so that other healers can kick back or even help out with the DPS, or take a little break with a mana potion. They're also great for getting some instant heals rolling for when heavy damage starts coming in, just to give your other healers an extra second or two to get some of their big heals out before people start falling over. Having some blanket heal over time effects on your raid will always be very valuable. Most of their healing spells are instant cast as well, which means Druids aren't really locked down at all that often. They can happily run, skip or jump through the air as they go about their business. This makes them one of the most mobile healers. They can always throw out something of value while on the move. Dodging raid mechanics should be no problem for a freely moving healer. You can also cover quite a lot of people with your HOTS, giving a large portion of your raid a bit of a safety blanket in case they take a little bit too much damage. Now, while they do have a lot of instant cast spells, the only spammable emergency heal they have is regrowth. So if your group is ever taking huge amounts of damage, outside of hotting everyone up and hoping for the best, you only have one heal to try and turn the tide. If regrowth spam isn't quite cutting it, your group might start dying one by one. That's not as much as an issue in raid environments because the other healers should be helping you out, but if you're in a dungeon and everyone is taking way too much damage, you might start to struggle quite a bit. Hotting everyone up sounds quite wonderful in practice, but it might be a lot harder than it first looks. Most of our heal over time abilities don't really last that long, and they start sucking up mana like nothing else when you're trying to spread them around. Druids might be the most mana hungry healers right now, which is never a good thing. That means stopping more for drinks in dungeons, and it means relying on your other healers a lot more in raids. If you don't manage your mana properly, you could go faster than an arcane mage. In a raid environment, Resto Druids should do pretty well. Their heal over time effects will always be a welcome addition to any healing roster. They bring a strong raid-wide healing cooldown in Tranquility and a decent external cooldown in Ironbark. They can also give a friendly healer Innovate to allow them to cast spells without mana cost for 12 seconds, but let's be honest, this is probably just going to be used on the Druid. 12 seconds is a lot of free HOTS. Ironbark has a decently short cooldown to make up for the lower 20% damage reduction, so be sure your tanks know they can make use of it every minute, otherwise it's going to waste. Trank is still a great raid-wide cooldown. The only downside is that now you have to plonk your butt down somewhere and channel it. You won't be able to move during Trank anymore. So while they do bring some utility, it's not an amazing amount of useful stuff when compared to some other classes. They should do well for themselves though. In dungeons, it's a bit of a different story. The rolling HOTS will always be great in small group content, but the lack of group utility might leave Druids a little lacking in their higher Mythic Plus keys. Their damage also isn't fantastic when compared to some other healers, which can be really important in smaller group play. I think they'll still do really well in Mythic Plus and dungeons in general, but they won't be on top of the list this time around. Moving on, let's have a look at a class which has some interesting and exciting changes this expansion, the Monks. Okay, I'm mainly talking about Soothing Mist because it's back and it's wonderful. I guess it's not like the spec was entirely overhauled, but getting such an iconic ability back seems to have made quite a lot of Mistweavers very happy. Mistweavers have a bit of everything right now. They have a few heal over time spells, they have a few direct heals, and they have some decent AoE heals. Some are instant cast, some need to be hard cast, and some are channeled. Literally a bit of everything. Their spell effects are also some of the coolest, especially if you're fond of blues and greens. I feel like monks have one of the most realised class fantasies when it comes to healer specs. If your party or raid aren't taking too much damage, you can even sneak in a quiet little rising sun kick or a roundhouse kick, just in case you weren't feeling kung fu enough. With quite a few instant cast spells and some great movement abilities, Mistweaver monks are also a very mobile healer. You might not have quite as many heal over time effects to throw out while moving, but you can always throw out a crazy essence fonts while you need to reposition. If you need to cross over to the other side of the room, a quick roll or torpedo or two, and you should be able to find a nice spot to start channeling your other spells. So you might not be as useful while on the move, but you're able to reposition way faster than any other healer. Thanks to their versatile kit, monks can funnel their efforts and heals into the entire raid, or they can focus on just keeping the tanks alive. They're capable of doing both jobs extremely well, but you might have to pick and choose your talents for the occasion, so you'd lock in your choice for Mythic Plus dungeons or for each raid encounter. With the return of Soothing Mist, monks can also spot heal tanks or debuffs extremely well thanks to the other instant cast spells you have while channeling your special mists. Mistweaver monks have strong baseline heals, but they sort of pay for that when it comes to cooldowns and utility. They have a raid-wide cooldown in Revival, which is incredibly useful when your raid just took a huge amount of damage and you need to get a little bit of time to recover. Revival gives everyone a quick boost of healing, which might just be the extra padding you need to start seeing the other raid cooldowns come into effect. It's also great for sniping heals, but that's maybe not something to be super proud of. They do have an external cooldown, but its uses will be fairly niche, and other healers bring more to the table when compared to a quick absorb shield with some extra healing tacked on top. Damage reduction cooldowns will almost always be preferred, especially for tank externals. In a raid environment, Mistweavers should do relatively well. Their general healing kit is very versatile, which allows them to fill any gap your healing roster might have, so if you need them to focus on the raid, they can do that. If you need them to focus on the tanks, they can do that as well. You can also rely on a Mistweaver's throughput numbers if nothing else. Their main raid-wide cooldown does leave a little to be desired, but it can still be very useful. They don't bring much utility to a raid setup, which might make them a little vulnerable to being sat on certain bosses. In dungeons, monks do bring a little bit more in terms of utility. Their AoE stun can be invaluable if they're the only one in your group who has access to one, and Ring of Peace can be used to hilarious effect. In higher keys you might suffer a little bit due to the lack of cooldowns, but on the flip side your strong heals should keep everyone topped off, providing they aren't standing in every patch of fire they can find. A Mistweaver monk can also kick out some reasonable DPS if you don't have to use your globals on healing, but it's still on the lower side when compared to some of the other healers. Up next is the healer which never seems to have trouble finding a raid group, the Holy Paladins. Using the power of the Holy Light, you can shock your allies back to health, give them a quick flash of light, or the good old reliable Holy Light spell itself. If you're really in a pinch, you can even sacrifice your own health to save your allies. Nothing saves Holy Paladin more than killing yourself, so you can get those sweet beacon heals. As a Holy Paladin, you're going to be limited to healing just one target at a time, for the most part anyways. We do have Light of Dawn for some AoE healing, and you can talent for a little bit more, but most of our spread out heals comes from beacons. Being able to heal 2 targets at once is what makes Paladins so great, especially when it comes to tank healing and spot healing nasty debuffs. Throw a beacon on the tank and you can happily heal up whoever else needs it, and the tank will always get some leftover heals. If you take the second beacon from the talent section, you can even beacon yourself in a tank to make sure both of you will always stay healthy, or just throw a beacon on each tank in raids to make sure you're always going to benefit from the mana returns, and your tanks will always have a good source of heals. It's definitely a lot different from the other healers, and it's a great deal of fun in my opinion. Paladins also have quite a few options to deal some extra damage, which might be one of their strongest traits this time around. Other healers can throw out a little bit of damage into the boss or trash, but Paladins can keep up with the tanks for the most part, which can be extremely valuable in both raids and dungeons. They could even take the Avenging Crusader talent to take things one step further and enter the Disc Priest territory of dealing damage to heal your allies. Not having to choose between damage and healing is an amazing ability which only 2 healers have access to right now, and it's the reason they'll probably end up on the top of the Mythic Plus key ladders. Even though their single target healing capabilities are fantastic, Holy Paladins do lack strong AoE heals, especially strong AoE burst. If your entire raid is dropping like flies, you can probably save a few of them with some quick judgment calls and your most powerful abilities, but chances are you won't be able to bring them all back to a safe level. You're going to have to rely on some of the other healers to bring the crazy AoE heals. That's only going to be a problem in raids, but thankfully you should have a few healers to help you out in those situations. In dungeons you shouldn't have too many problems keeping 5 people people alive. Their mobility also isn't that great, although it's certainly not the worst out of the healing pack. A few abilities are instant cast, so you can at least do something while you need to move, and we do have a mobility cooldown in Divine Steed, which gives us a decent speed boost, but you're going to want to reposition quickly so you can get back to casting your mana-friendly heals. In a raid environment, Holy Paladins will most likely be given the job of tank healing and debuff healing. Anyone who will take consistent, reliable damage will be where their heals are needed most. But just because you don't have a healing tide totem in your pocket or a tranquility in your booty, that doesn't mean Holy Paladins won't be useful for other reasons. Their auras and aura mastery can provide a variety of decent buffs, mainly to do with damage reduction. A flat 20% damage reduction to all allies within 10 yards is pretty handy, and then you also bring Blessing of Protection for those nasty physical damage debuffs, Blessing of Sacrifice for a 30% damage reduction external cooldown for tanks, or anyone else who desperately needs it, as well as Blessing of Freedom for pesky slows, Lay on Hands to really save a life, and Divine Shield to ensure that against all odds, at least you won't need any extra healing for a short amount of time. Paladins really do bring a great amount of utility to any group, but they might be paying for that a little bit right now with their lower throughput numbers. But hey, that's what the other healers are for. In a dungeon group, Paladins should excel quite comfortably. Even if they don't take the damage to healing talent, they can still kick out some really respectable damage. That's going to help out in all sorts of ways, from assisting with priority add damage to just killing a boss a little faster so you don't have as much to heal. You won't feel the pressure from the lack of AoE heals with only 4 other targets to worry about as well, and you still bring all of that wonderful utility. If their throughput numbers increase, I think we'll see Holy Paladins do exceptionally well. Let's check out the Priests next, the only class with 2 healing specs, so at least if one isn't doing too hot you can always fall back on the other. Let's start out by looking at Discipline. This spec seems to get at least a few changes every expansion we go through, and Battle for Azeroth is no exception. Discipline are back to spamming bubbles, but they're still going to be healing via Atonement, which means they'll deal damage to heal. This isn't super unique at this point, we've had a few variations of healers dealing damage throughout the years, but right now I think the current Disc Priest is the most fun this concept has ever been. I think they finally hit the nail on the head with what they were trying to do all throughout Legion. You can spam your power word shield on as many targets as you want and they'll all get buffed with Atonement. Whenever you deal damage with your spells, anyone with Atonement will also get some healing. They probably won't reach the same levels of healing throughput as some of the other classes, but they're the only class who by default doesn't have to choose between dealing damage or throwing out some heals. This makes them incredibly valuable in almost any situation, but especially Dungeons and Mythic Plus. Their job is to keep everyone alive while kicking out as much DPS as possible, and they can swing back and forth between providing more damage or more healing, making them very flexible dependent on the needs of your group throughout an encounter. If they are free to just go ham on the boss, they can kick out as much DPS as an actual DPS, which is pretty insane. While their main strength is their damage potential and flexibility to be able to heal and deal damage, they also bring quite a few awesome utility spells to the table. Power Word Barrier allows you to throw down a 25% damage reduction bubble wherever you need it, so you can have everyone group up to benefit from the massive damage reduction for large AoE abilities, or you can even just pop it on the tanks if it's not needed anywhere else. 25% is pretty high for an AoE effect, and you can probably get both tanks most of the time if that's what you're using it for. They also have Pain Suppression, a massive 40% damage reduction external cooldown for your tanks or anyone else who's taking crazy amounts of damage. Those 2 spells alone give Disc Priest some of the best external cooldowns available for your raid or dungeon groups. If you don't need to make use of Barrier, or if everyone is just too spread out in certain encounters, and shielding your entire group sounds like fun, you can also talent away your barrier to get Luminous Barrier, which provides everyone within 40 yards of you with a quick bubble. They also have a bunch of tools to help them deal extra damage, which not only helps your group-wide DPS, but also increases the amount of healing they can provide. Disc seems like it's going to be incredibly strong going into Battle for Azeroth, but it does have a few pitfalls. If you don't have anything to attack, you can't really provide an amazing amount of throughput, so in encounters where bosses disappear or become inactive, you're stuck to spamming Shadow Mend, which isn't really the greatest thing in the world, so without an active target, your usefulness drops quite considerably. Disc Priest also require good knowledge of encounters and a lot of planning. Power Word Barrier is incredibly strong, but if you place it down after the damage goes out, it's not really that useful. Disc also doesn't do very well while trying to catch up on heals, so you need your atonements already rolling when the heavy damage comes out, so you can already be healing players via atonement. If you want to play reactively instead of proactively, Disc might not be a lot of fun. They're also not all that mobile. You only have some movement speed boosts from talents like Feather, which really aren't that great if you're having to trek across the entire encounter area. Thankfully, you can spam bubbles on the move and penance can be cast while moving, so even if you're a little slow, at least you're still useful. In a raid environment, Disc Priests should do incredibly well. They will nearly always have a priority target to keep the damage flowing, and damage is always important when it comes to raid encounters, and you have enough spells to spread your atonements further for AoE healing, or just keep the tanks happy and alive. Bringing 2 different types of damage reduction spells will also be really useful, and the ability to go from full focus healing to full focus damage is amazing. While the other healers are tickling the boss, a Disc Priest can start trying to catch up to the other DPS. It's really satisfying knowing that your damage really does matter, even coming from a healer. In Dungeons and Mythic Plus, Disc will shine the brightest, with healer damage becoming more and more important as you get into higher keys. No other healer will come close to providing the same damage and healing at the same time as a Disc Priest. The other classes all have to choose between DPS or heals, with the exception of the Holy Paladins with a specific talent, but Disc Priests can just go ham on a boss while their atonements are keeping everyone alive. Add their utility on top of that and you have a winning combination. So what about Holy? Holy Priest has always been the staple jack-of-all-trades healer. They're really good at pretty much everything. They have some heal over time effects, single target heals, AoE heals, and Prayer of Mending provides some valuable reactionary heals. Their Holy Words also give them the option of focusing entirely on one type of healing, and benefiting from the huge heals a Holy Word can deliver. If you single target heal more, Serenity comes off cooldown faster. If you AoE heal more, Sanctuary comes off cooldown faster. It's really simple, elegant, and easy to understand, and it works really, really well. You can fill the gap a Holy Paladin might leave as a tank healer, or fill the gap a Resto Druid might leave as a raid healer. You can also bounce back and forth during an encounter if you really need to, which makes Holy Priests one of the most flexible healers in the game. They're just pretty good at whatever you want them to do, and it's nice knowing that whatever encounter you walk into, you have enough tools at your disposal to always feel useful. A Holy Priest's main strengths come from their Holy Words. Used properly, they can provide a huge burst of single target or AoE healing. If you know when your group will take a bunch of damage and have a Sanctuary cast ready to go, you can bring an entire group of people up to a safe level immediately. If you know when the tanks are going to take a huge hit, getting ready with a Serenity cast could top them off right away. That makes it incredibly important to get your Holy Words back off cooldown as quickly as possible, but your weaker heals can leave a little bit to be desired if your entire raid is taking a bunch of damage. Holy Priests also have quite a useful set of utility abilities, especially with the return of Symbol of Hope as a baseline ability. This allows you to provide an extra 12% mana to all of your healers, which will be fantastic in progression raiding. They also have a decent raid-wide healing cooldown in Divine Hymn, which also increases the amount of healing your raid receives, giving everyone a little extra boost to make sure no one dies. While they do bring Guardian Spirit to the table, it's not going to be quite as useful as a straight-up damage reduction cooldown, except in very niche situations. Its effects are nice, but they're not really something you ever want to be planning around unless you're taking advantage of the cheat death effect. Holy Priests are just as mobile as Disc Priests, which means they're not very mobile at all. If you have to move a lot during an encounter, you might get quite frustrated, because the best movement ability you have is Feather, which isn't all that much and can be stolen by your pesky raid team. You can cast a few spells on the move though, including both of your big Holy Words, so at least you won't be useless while running around. Holy Priests do have a few options when it comes to dealing damage, but they also have to choose between dealing damage or doing some healing, just like most other classes. Their damage potential also isn't that great, but at least you can do something if no healing is required. In a raid environment, Holy Priests should do just fine, like they always have. Not enough has changed to really swap up where a Holy Priest does well. They can provide great single target heals, great AoE heals, and some good utility, but I don't think they'll be quite as high a priority as picking up some of the other healers who have stronger raid cooldowns. You should definitely still do very well for yourself, but I think if you only have one priest on your team, you might benefit a little bit more from them playing as discipline. In a dungeon environment, Holy Priests should manage just fine, especially with lower end keys. As you get higher and higher up the ladder, Disc Priest would probably shine a lot brighter in many different situations, which puts Holy Priests in a unique situation, because they're the only healer who can actually swap to another spec without changing character entirely. While Holy shouldn't have many problems in dungeons, if Disc is always doing better, I think we'll see a lot of players just play Disc. But if you're glued to your Holy Priest, you should have enough tools to get the job done. Your Holy Words will be very powerful when you can cover your entire group with Sanctuary. Serenity will always keep the tank topped off no matter how much damage they take, and you might get a little more use out of Guardian Spirit. You're probably going to run into issues if you ever have to move around a lot though. If you can't stand still, you can't get your Holy Words back, which might be a big problem. And last but not least, let's check out the Shamans. These guys and gals are a Swiss army knife of utility compared to everyone else, and that's probably why they find a nice comfortable spot in most raid teams. They're well equipped to deal with a bunch of AoE damage and have some decent single target heals on the side as well. Most people probably know Shamans for their chain heal spam, and that's probably never going to change. Healing rain down, rip tides out, and fill in the gaps with some sweet bouncing heals. They'll probably be more comfortable as a raid healer instead of a dedicated tank healer, but they could manage it if they really had to. Their throughput might be a little low right now, but that's not really why you would bring a Shaman to your group. The amount of different abilities they bring to the table with totems and general utility is amazing. They can cast everything while moving using Spirit Walker's Grace. Healing Stream Totem provides them with some good passive heals even if they're totally locked down. Healing Tide Totem is a powerful raid-wide cooldown which not only can be used while moving, but also doesn't need constant attention to keep the heals flowing. Drop it down and start going to town with chain heals. It's like channeling a full Divine Hymn or Tranquility while using all of your other spells. Spirit Link Totem can provide you with some really interesting possibilities to keep your entire raid alive. You also have Earthbind Totem for a targeted AoE slow, and with the return of Tremor Totem you can even mass dispel fears, charms, and sleeps. That's all without even looking at the talent section. Being able to bring so many different types of utility to a group, some of which are incredibly powerful in their own right, will probably mean you're taking a Resto Shaman to your raid even if their heals end up being really subpar. They're already useful enough without taking their heals into account, which is sort of where Holy Paladin is right now. I think both Holy Paladin and Resto Shamans are struggling a little bit when it comes to raw throughput, but the utility they bring will still save them a spot on any raid roster. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with Shamans right now. Their numbers are a little low. Thankfully, numbers are the one thing which can change from day to day, so that might not be the case when we hit live servers. While they bring a whole bunch of different useful perks to a group, one thing they don't really bring too much of is damage. They can provide some extra damage if they don't have any healing to worry about, but it's still not going to measure up to a Paladin or a Disc Priest. They're just heads and tails above everyone else when it comes to damage right now. Shamans also don't have any decent mobility outside of Ghost Wolf. With the removal of Gust of Wind, there's no boot up the backside movement ability, so you're running around everywhere with the priests, but at least you go a little faster in your Ghost Wolf form. Healing on the move isn't too bad, especially with Spirit Walker's Grace, so at least you can keep churning out some watery heals while slowly making your way across the room. In raid environments, you'll probably still end up with at least one Shaman. So many things they bring to the table are invaluable, but having multiple Spirit Links might not be quite as worthwhile. They'll fill the role of a raid healer more comfortably than a tank or spot healer, but should be able to do both decently enough if you're not at the cutting edge of Mythic progression. If their numbers pick up by the time the first raid opens, they should be a fantastic healer no matter what your current healing setup. Dungeons are a little different. With both a lack of consistent damage output and not great throughput right now, Shamans will probably struggle when it comes to higher Mythic Plus keys. Their utility can only stretch so far, and their shortcomings can be more than made up for in a raid environment with multiple healers. You don't have that luxury in a dungeon group, you're on your own. You do bring an AoE stun to the group, which is definitely nice if no one else has one, but I don't think a Shaman will ever come close to a Holy Paladin or a Disc Priest with how everything is shaping up right now. And that's all of the healers covered. If you're desperate to hear a ranking in order, please don't hate me if you're on the bottom, but I would say for raids, Disc Priests, Holy Paladins and Shamans are going to be at the top, and then the other three healers, Druid, Holy Priest and Monk, will all be more or less interchangeable, I think. They each bring something unique and can help cover a lot of different requirements when it comes to raid-wide healing or spot healing, but they lack some of the game-changing abilities that the other three healers bring. I would hesitate to even call this a ranking because of how versatile most healers can be, but you're going to want the great utility that comes from certain classes if you're on the cutting edge of progression. If you're just doing normal and heroic, the classes will more or less just be on even footing with each other, but when it comes to dungeons, I think we're going to see a much clearer distinction between each healer. Holy Paladins and Disc Priests will still be at the top. Their great utility, good group coverage and very high DPS potential lends themselves perfectly to Mythic Plus dungeons. Druids should find a happy home in dungeons as well, though their current damage potential is a little lacking compared to the top two healers, which means they'll probably end up being a little less favoured when we get into high level keys. Shamans, Monks and Holy Priests will probably do about the same across most dungeons. They should still be able to push high keys, but I think Holy Paladin, Disc Priest and Druid will have an easier time with it and be some of the most favoured healers for really testing how high we can go. So that's it for my ranking of the healers going into Battle for Azeroth. What do you think I got right? What do you think I got wrong? Probably all of it, right? Whatever you're thinking, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you want to hop on that train, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.